Hey everyone, this is Scenario, Chris Gaming. Today I'm going to be doing a guide, not so much on how to optimize your paladin, but more on how to enjoy it, enjoy the feel of it in class itself, Fusion, and we've been through a few changes, going from Legion to BFA, felt like we lost a lot, and I've been playing Ret since vanilla, trying to capture that feeling that every now and then you used to get with those Crusader Strike buffs back in Burning Crusade, or back when we got Divine Storm and all the storms are coming, memes were coming through. Judgment was super OP. Had a lot of good times, and I left the game for a bit. Came back in Legion. At the end of Legion, I really enjoyed where we were at. Even if we weren't top tier, we were still definitely fun. Tier 21, I think I really enjoyed that playstyle as a verse to tier 20. But now in BFA, trying to figure out where we sit as a DPS class and whether or not we can actually do viable DPS and enjoy ourselves while doing it. I have spent some time playing out with the optimal talent build. Obviously, Blood Mallet's done a bit of simming for their own setup and their recommended setup, basically. Where essentially Execution, Wrath, Wake of Ashes, Inquisition, DPS cooldowns. Unbreakable Spirit is technically a DPS increase because it gives you more shields. Shields blow up, they cause damage. However, I feel like playing with that build, we've got about 11 buttons to monitor, especially if you're running the where is it? Condensed Life Force. You basically got 11 buttons that you've got to be on top of all the time, and it just feels, at least for my small brain, kind of draining. So the build that I actually like to play with in Mythics is this one here that you can see now. So I prefer Righteous Verdict just for that single target DPS. Even though it doesn't really contribute anything to AoE, I don't feel like with this build I'm really lacking any AoE DPS. So I feel like I can, spend one talent towards single target. That's a really good single target increase. That's not really going to impact my AoE DPS negatively. I used to play with Blade of Wrath, and it's definitely a viable option, and I could still do it with my current traits. I'm running 2 expurgations. So technically I could run Blade of Wrath if I wanted to reduce the buttons, but I've changed my buttons around down the bottom, so I've got a few extra keybinds pushed through, and Hammer of Wrath, just because I'm running Vision Major, I'm also running Hammer of Wrath. You can use Hammer of Wrath during the Vision procs, so I feel like it gives a little bit more burst during those Wings procs. Fist of Justice, my preferred. Don't really take Repentance or Blinding Light. However, if I could be bothered, I think Blinding Light would be decent for dungeons where, say for example, the tank needs to kite. However, I don't think Repentance is really viable versus all the other AoE and single target CC that's available out there at the moment. And I mean, you're mostly running in 5-man groups, and there's always going to be someone who can bring something in that regard. Blind Judgment, I've tried playing a couple of little meme builds where you stack, triple stack your, wherever it is. Lost it. I believe it's Indomitable Justice, where you deal extra damage the lower your enemy's health is compared to yours. However, the trait itself doesn't sim that highly, and Divine Judgment, I mean, it'd be funny in a PvP situation if you were trying to, say, one-shot nuke someone, you'd run triple Indomitable Justice, triple Avenging, whatever it is, one that gives you Mastery, Avenging Wrath, and then basically you just build up until you got maximum stacks and pop wings and judge them and try and one-shot them. You'd even run Execution Sentence for that. I mean, there's a whole build around that, but I haven't really tried any of that in PvP. I don't think I'm skilled enough in that regard. Aside from that, Wake of Ashes, I feel it's the easiest one to use in AoE situations, but you have to be careful on skittish weeks, just because it front loads so much of your damage. Generally my opener will be Wings, Wake, Bubble immediately, because I'll usually pull Threat straight off that. You could run Consecration. The issue is they have to stand in it for the entire 6 seconds, otherwise you don't get as much damage out of it as Wake of Ashes. And that can be an issue on, say, Sanguine weeks or Waking weeks, where people are moving a lot. But on other weeks where you're just basically pulling a massive AoE pack and stacking it and bursting it down, you could run Consecration. But it only generates 1 holy power, and that's a bit of an issue to get the ball rolling for your DPS rotation in AoE. I'll touch on that in a bit. Next one, Unbreakable Spirit. I used to run with Cavalier just because I hate how little mobility we have. However, I have come to live with that because Unbreakable Spirit, I feel, is just too valuable when running high keys. Having that bubble available for, pretty much every big trash pack, it just comes in handy, especially if you're going to be doing, 300k AoE DPS and you're going to be pulling a huge amount of threat. That's going to be the difference between you dying 15 times in a dungeon and dying twice. For the second last row, the 90 row, Word of Glory is my go-to for dungeons, just because it can proc off and it can also proc Divine Purpose, which I also run for dungeons. Even though it does cost a little bit of DPS, if you get a Divine Purpose proc and you pop Word of Glory, you can heal 3 people in the group for 120k. And that's extra healing on top of any Flash of Lights you get. Selfless Healer, it can drop off between packs. It loses effectiveness when you're trying to just top up one person and then go back to DPS. Usually I don't have I don't run Voodoo or anything like that, or bring my party frames down when I'm running 5-mans as Ret. So I'm usually, if I'm doing Blessing of Freedom or something like that, I'll have to select someone manually in the top corner of the party to rebound my F1 through F5 keys, so I don't have party targets bound. And then the last one, tier 100, Divine Purpose, my general go-to. I just like the playstyle. It feels smooth. It feels enjoyable. I feel like it's the most forgiving playstyle. With Crusade, you have to, do optimally build and get ready to build up as many holy points as you can, and then dump and spend as quickly as possible to get those stacks up really high to get the most value out of it. And also, while running Vision of Perfection, it's also got less uptime of the 30% damage and more uptime building. So even though it lasts longer, Light's Decree will give you a 10-second stack. Vision of Perfection will give you a 10-second stack. It's still going to be less impactful than 8 seconds of event. So that's my personal feeling. But obviously, if you guys think different, or if there's anything to try, you can let me know down below. As for traits, generally I like to run triple Light's Decree. Has been nerfed twice. It doesn't feel anywhere near as good as it did last season, especially on reaping packs. I was hitting upwards of 600, 700k. I even had one pull where I hit 800k on a reaping plus a big pull, and that was definitely fun. But this season we don't really have that kind of output. At the moment, because I'm also doing Mythic Progression Rating, the other thing that I'm running is I'm running some Expurgation stacks. They do seem still quite high, even though I'm not running the best in-slot build. But I feel like during dungeons, they don't really add a whole lot. Realistically, I could take maybe Razan's Fury, because you're AoEing multiple adds and it has a chance to proc on everything hit by your Divine Storm. And the other thing you could do is you could also run multiple Empyrean powers, because in AoE, the value of that goes up, and then also running Divine Purpose, the value goes up as well, because it can proc and also proc off Divine Purpose. So there is that I could also do to squeeze out some more AoE DPS, but I feel like running triple stack Light's Decree, 1 Empyrean Power, and then Divine Purpose gives me enough procs that I can keep that rolling over and do some decent AoE damage. The other thing you could do, maybe if you had the gear for it, would be run, say, 2 Relentless Inquisitors, 3 Light's Decree, and 1 Empyrean Power. And that would also not be bad and pretty decent on single target as well. I just don't have the gear for that, so I haven't really been bothered trying to farm it. As you can see, I've got a whole stack of Azerite gear down here in my bags. I could maybe squeeze something out of it, but yeah, it doesn't really suit the playstyle that I enjoy. So yeah, that's it. Now for the neck. So generally I'll run Essence of the Focusing Iris. Just a little bit of extra haste. Pretty good, pretty juicy. It's definitely not horrible. And I also like to run Memory of Lucid Dreams in dungeons. However, if I was running in the raid, I would swap out Lucid Dreams for Crucible of Flame, just because it adds more single target DPS. But Memory plus Divine Purpose plus Empyrean Power, all of those play into each other to give you more and more Divine Purpose procs. And that in turn gives you more, holy power spent throughout the dungeon. That just means more Divine Purpose, Divine Storms in to win. You could also run Vision in the minor and put Condensed Life Force as the major. Condensed does do some decent AoE DPS and it kicks ass on single target. Or you could alternatively swap Vision of Perfection over for Essence of the Focusing Iris, but I don't feel like we really lack on the AoE pools. It's more single target that we want to focus on. So Lucid Dreams is a decent mid-ground between AoE and single target. Vision technically is our highest simming individual essence. And then Essence of the Focusing Iris just has a good stat stick buff. You could also maybe run Purification Protocol, does some decent AoE, but again, I prefer just a little bit of haste because it factors into both single and multi-target. And Crucible of Flame would also be suitable for another mine as well. I generally don't tend to run, say, Blood of the Enemy. I have considered it, but I feel like we already get Wings, which gives us 20% extra crit. Plus, we got those Wings procs. Plus, in combat, I'll have. I was actually playing around with some of my gears that aren't correct, but normally I'll have 22% crit and 22% haste. So, in combat, I'm sitting at maybe 25% haste, and with Wings up, close to 50% crit. That extra 25 doesn't really seem that good to me. I feel like getting extra damage versus extra crit is going to be the way to go. Because the best way to scale high crit is with more damage or more haste, and the best way to scale more damage is with more crit or more haste. Best way to scale haste with more crit or more damage. So, you want to kind of level them all out. You don't want to push one up to that maximum region. And I mean, I've seen some of the world's best, Ret Paladins running, 30% crit. And they'll run critical navigation and basically they just dump everything they have into crit to get the most out of those expurgation traits. But as I said, I don't really enjoy that playstyle. Conflict and Strife, I don't really see any reason for that to be used in PvP. There may come some time at some point in the future where maybe in the visions where the extra speed boost might be helpful, but I feel like just changing over. Actually, I probably wouldn't change over to Cavalier. That you can maybe find a piece of armor with the horse trait on it, and that might be viable. Hard to say. And then World Vein Resonance, most of my guildies don't really run it. I think at the moment it's still bugged, so it's kind of hard to tell. Unbound Force, it is getting a buff, but I don't think it actually is that high, and it adds another button. It makes it a bit harder to maintain a full rotation and enjoy yourself playing the build. you'd need a weak aura to keep an eye out for the buff, or you'd need to have a look in the top corner of your screen every now and then for the buff to know exactly when to use it optimally. And then Purification, Focusing Iris, both of them do pretty decent DPS in AoE. I ran Purification last week for a couple of dungeons, and I think I only got one insta-kill out of like 5 dungeons. So I don't think it's really worthwhile running just for that, unless you had 3 people in the group running Purification Protocol. And then there was a chance that maybe all 3 of you casting it at the same time on every pack, you might delete a few mobs, but just for you by yourself and doing your own thing, I don't think it's worthwhile running. So yeah, that's your Heart of Azeroth done. Now, as for stats, generally I like to run around 21% haste. I feel like that plus a little bit more is realistically the smoothest feeling you're going to get. I don't know exactly what the breakpoints are, but I feel like just from the way I play at 21% to 25%, things just seem to feel smooth. I don't really have much downtime. I've tried running with 15% haste. I've tried running with 20% haste. I've tried running with 25. And at 15, it feels like things don't proc often enough. And at 20, there's the occasional downtime where your Righteous Verdict is going to drop off and going to lose effectiveness on that. So I think 21% is generally where I like my haste, and then you can build everything else up around that. Now for trinkets, I do currently have the 2 best in slot trinkets sitting somewhere in the bag, Razor Coral and Pod, but they are quite low level. And the other thing is that because I'm running Vision of Perfection, I have this nice juicy animated blood. The short term on use trinket, and it gives pretty good burst potential. I basically just macroed it in with my wings, because the cooldown on this is 1.5 minutes. The cooldown wings is just over 1.6. So basically I use my trinket every time I use wings. And then rotation is pretty straightforward. I'll go into the rotation shortly. Then, whatever Azerite you can get, you want at least 1 Fire and Power, 1 Light's Decree, and then anything else as a bonus. If you can get 3 Light's Decree, 2 Light's Decree, the one that gives you Mastery with Avenging Wrath, it's also decent for AoE and for this kind of build. But I just like the way Light's Decree feels, even if it's not really optimal. So that's pretty much it for talents, essence, traits. So we'll just go over and have a look at the dummy over here and talk a bit about the DPS rotation. Okay, so let's talk about damage rotation now. For single target, specifically bosses or large individual mobs, like the construct on the bridge in Rest. Basically, start out by getting your builders on cooldown as fast as possible. So when approaching the target, your furthest usage abilities in order. So as you're approaching the target, you can use Judgment for 30 yards. Then as you get closer, your next closest ability is going to be Blade of Justice, 12 yards. That'll give you 3 Holy Power, and that'll get the ball rolling. Then single target, if you're going to use wings, personal decision when that, and you kind of need a feel, like say for example, you know that the next pull is going to be a big AoE pull, then you're going to get more value out of holding Avenging Wrath. But if it's a boss, obviously you want to use Avenging Wrath on cooldown. So once you've got your 3 Holy Power, got your 2 builders on cooldown, basically you're just going to go in, use Templar's Verdict, and then continue to build using your priority, basically Judgment, Blade of Justice, Crusader Strike, and if you've got Avenging Wrath up, then Hammer of Wrath is going to take priority over Crusader Strike. So Judgment, Blade of Justice, Hammer of Wrath, And then essentially what you want to do is, as you're spending your holy power, basically you want to keep an eye on that debuff or that buff from Righteous Verdict, and you can cast spenders until you know that that buff's going to drop off in the next 1 to 2 global cooldowns. So build, 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 spend before it drops, build, spend. You can use Divine Purpose procs pretty much whenever. You just want to avoid using, say, Divine Storm procs on Judgment in single target, because you'll get less damage from it. Then for AoE, a little bit less complicated for AoE. If it's a big pack, essentially what you want to do is, as you're running in, Judgment, Blade of Justice, then you'll be at that group of enemies. You want to cast Wings, Divine Storm, Wake, Divine Storm, and then build as much as you can, and then just spam out Divine Storms. Your priority in that situation is essentially just getting out as many Divine Storms as possible. So using spenders, you don't have to worry about anything. So say for example, you've got an important spender coming up. If you get a Blade of Justice proc, you can use that before you use Divine Storm. You will get a lot of extras because of Empyrean Power, because of Divine Purpose, and you'll get refunded because of the Memory of Lucid Dreams if you're running that. And so our AoE rotation is pretty similar to our single target, except you don't worry about the Righteous Verdict debuff dropping off. Always try and focus like a priority target. If something's got more health than anything else, you want to use that as your single target attacks. So Judgment, Blade of Justice, Data Strike, all that kind of stuff. And then on skittish weeks, you probably want to hold off on casting Wake of Ashes until all of your spenders are on cooldown, all of your builders are on cooldown, just to give the tank a little bit more time to build up some threat. So I'd run in, I'd use Judgment, Blade of Justice, Wings, Divine Storm, get all of these on cooldown. Then once you've emptied out your Holy Power, then Wake of Ashes. You still want to use Wake of Ashes while you've got Wings up, and you want to try and do that every single time. But sometimes, obviously, if your Wings has run out and you don't have a Wings proc up, it's fine to use Wake of Ashes when you need it as another builder, or if you're on a multi-target fight. So that's pretty much it. The damage rotation is pretty basic. There's some guides on Wowhead and Icy Veins that will give you a pretty good idea. Things that you kind of need to work on is get that feeling for the internal cooldown of Blade of Justice. If you play enough, you'll kind of get an understanding of when you're going to get a Blade of Justice proc, and you can kind of pre-plan or preempt when that's coming up, and then instead of using a global cooldown for Crusader Strike, you can dump one into Blade of Justice when it's going to proc. Aside from that, I think I've spoken about everything. If anyone has any questions, let me know in the comments below. Pretty much it. So as always, stay out of trouble or cause some, whatever's more fun, and we'll see you all back here next time. Peace.